Hey everyone, welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're diving into something I think a lot of you have been wanting to explore more deeply.
Mindset.
Yeah, exactly, mindset. We've touched on it here and there, but this time we're going all in.
Pulling out all the stops.
Pulling at all the stops, yeah. And, we always go deep,
Always deep.
but for this deep dive, we're focusing on Mindset by Carol Dweck. And the reason we're doing this is because so many of you have told us that you're really interested in the idea of mindset and you want to understand it in a really thorough way.
Thorough but accessible.
Accessible, yeah. Because I think sometimes these concepts can get a little bit academic and a little bit jargony.
Right.
And we want to kind of cut through all of that and really extract the most important nuggets, those aha moments that can actually shift how you see yourself and your potential.
Exactly. So really, the mission here is to explore how what you believe about your own abilities can fundamentally shape your life.
Right, because that's really what mindset is all about. So let's jump right in, why don't we?
Let's do it.
Okay, so Dweck's work, I think the brilliance of it is that it really highlights two kind of dominant ways of thinking about our talents and qualities.
Yeah.
And those are the fixed mindset and the growth mindset.
The kind of fundamental fork in the road.
Yeah. And I think most of us probably find ourselves somewhere on a spectrum between these two mindsets.
Right.
So let's talk about, first of all, the fixed mindset. So with a fixed mindset, you believe that your intelligence, your personality, your talents are largely static.
Kind of baked in, right? From the get-go.
Baked in, yeah. Like you're dealt a hand of cards and that's what you've got to work with.
And this has some really interesting implications for how you approach life, right? If you believe that your abilities are fixed, you're often very driven by a need to constantly prove yourself. You want to demonstrate that you have enough of these inherent qualities.
Right.
Mistakes and challenges can feel very, very threatening because they seem to expose a lack of something fundamental.
Yeah, so if you do poorly on a test, it's not just that you didn't do well on that particular test.
Right.
It feels like it's a statement about your overall intelligence.
It feels like a referendum on you.
Yeah. Now, on the other hand, you have the growth mindset.
Right. The more flexible approach.
Yeah. And with a growth mindset, you believe that your abilities and qualities aren't static. They can be developed, they can be expanded through dedication, through effort, through learning from your experiences, both the good and the bad.
Through pushing yourself.
Right. So in this perspective, you see challenges as opportunities to learn and to grow.
Exactly. You're almost drawn to the challenge.
Yeah, because you know that's how you're going to stretch yourself. Setbacks aren't seen as reasons to give up. They're seen as valuable feedback, right?
Right. They're information.
They're information, yeah.
Like signposts pointing the way.
Yeah, and effort is not a sign that you're lacking something. It's the engine of mastery, right?
It's how you get better.
Yeah, it's how you get better. I think this is where things start to get really interesting for me.
Oh, yeah.
Because we think about, people who are really successful. And a lot of times we make this assumption that they were always destined for greatness.
Like they were born with it.
Yeah. But Dweck provides all these examples of people who achieved incredible things, but were considered ordinary or even struggled early on.
Right. It wasn't a given from the start.
No, not at all. So Darwin and Tolstoy, intellectual giants,
Yeah.
they were apparently pretty average kids.
Average Joes.
Yeah. Ben Hogan, a legendary golfer, he was actually really uncoordinated as a child.
Hard to imagine.
Yeah. Cindy Sherman, an amazing photographer, she failed her first photography course.
I bet that professor felt silly later.
Yeah, exactly. And Geraldine Page, a really celebrated actress, was actually advised early in her career to give up acting because she was told she didn't have the talent.
Wow.
So, this is just a handful of examples, but I think it really challenges our assumptions about talent and where it comes from.
It certainly makes you think about the role of innate ability versus something that is cultivated over time.
Absolutely. So now let's think about how these mindsets shape how we see ourselves.
Okay.
So if you have more of a growth mindset, you're likely to be more open to getting accurate information about your current abilities, even if it's not all positive, even if there are areas where you need to improve, because you see it as information, right?
It's a roadmap,
Yeah.
not a dead end. It's not a judgment on you as a person. It's just useful feedback.
Right. But if you're operating from a fixed mindset, where your abilities are seen as static, you might have a tendency to distort information. Maybe emphasize your successes, because you want to reinforce that sense of inherent talent.
Right.
And kind of downplay failures to protect your ego.
It's understandable, right? If you feel like your worth is on the line.
Yeah.
You're going to protect it.
Exactly.
But the problem is that can create this sort of inaccurate picture of where you stand.
Yeah, you're not seeing yourself clearly.
Yeah.
Now, another really important point that Dweck makes is that these mindsets aren't just about intelligence.
Right. It goes way beyond IQ tests.
Yeah. We also have what she calls an intelligence mindset when it comes to our mental capabilities, like problem solving and learning new things.
Sure.
And then we also have a personality mindset, which governs how we view our personal qualities, like dependability, social skills, things like that.
Right. There's more interpersonal traits.
Yeah, exactly.
And so in those domains, a fixed mindset leads to this kind of underlying concern about being evaluated. Are you smart enough?
Are you a good enough person?
Exactly. But a growth mindset shifts your focus to how you can develop and improve in these areas.
Right. Like, how can I become more dependable?
Exactly.
How can I improve my communication skills? So I want you to think about someone you know, or maybe even recognizing yourself, who seems really preoccupied with proving their intelligence or their character.
Okay.
And notice how sensitive they might be to being corrected or to making mistakes.
Makes sense, right?
Yeah.
If you truly believe you can't change,
Yeah.
criticism cuts deep.
Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about relationships.
Okay.
Because Dweck actually explores how these mindsets can play out in our relationships.
Right. They don't exist in a vacuum.
No, they don't. So, someone with a fixed mindset, they might view a successful relationship as one where their partner is constantly affirming their inherent worth, their inherent lovability.
Unconditional acceptance.
Yeah.
All the time.
Yeah. And this can actually become problematic because if every challenge or difference of opinion is perceived as a threat to that uncritical acceptance, it becomes really hard to address problems constructively.
Right. You're always walking on eggshells.
Yeah.
Trying not to disrupt that perfect image.
Right. Now, on the other hand, a growth-oriented person is more likely to see a healthy relationship as one where both partners can openly discuss issues, they can learn from disagreements, they can grow together.
Right.
But this can create tension if one partner's desire for self-improvement is seen by the other partner as a criticism.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah. They might feel like, well, are you saying I'm not good enough as I am?
If you want to change, are you rejecting me?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Now, Dweck also talks about something she calls CEO disease, and I think this is so fascinating.
Yeah. Tell me more.
So she uses the example of Lee Iacocca, who had those huge successes at Chrysler.
Right. A business legend.
Yeah, but then he kind of fell into this trap of repeating past formulas.
Sticking with what worked before.
Yeah, it was almost as if his earlier achievements had solidified this belief that he had a fixed set of winning strategies.
Like a magic formula.
Yeah, and he wasn't really adapting to a changing market.
Even though the world was moving on.
Right, and contrast that with someone like Darwin Smith of Kimberly-Clark. He led this incredible transformation of the company, and looking back on his career, he said something really striking.
What was that?
He said, "I never stopped trying to be qualified for the job."
Interesting.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
And I think that really embodies that growth mindset,
Yeah.
right? Like, you're never done learning, you're never done improving.
You're always striving to be better.
Yeah. And I think this highlights an important question for anyone in a leadership position. What's the tension between the desire for immediate results and the commitment to long-term growth?
Because often those two things are in conflict.
They can be, yeah.
There's often a lot of pressure to deliver those quick wins, to be seen as a hero in the short term, and that can be really driven by a fixed mindset.
Right. That need for validation, like, I'm the one who can fix this.
Right.
But a growth mindset is more focused on building a sustainable foundation for the future.
Even if that means taking some risks.
Exactly.
Or facing some setbacks along the way.
Right. And Dweck actually points to Albert Dunlap as someone who openly embraced a fixed mindset.
Oh, yeah.
He was all about those short-term results, no matter the cost.
Right. Chainsaw Al, they called him.
Yeah.
Not exactly known for nurturing long-term growth.
No, not at all. Okay, I want to shift gears again and talk about some really inspiring examples of people who demonstrated resilience through a growth mindset.
Okay, I love these stories.
Yeah, me too. So there's this wrestler who, after a tough loss, was told by her opponent, "You're a joke." Brutal, right?
Oof, that's harsh.
Yeah. But instead of internalizing that criticism, she used it as fuel, as motivation to train harder.
She didn't let it define her.
No. And guess what? She ended up winning an Olympic bronze medal.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah. And her personal motto, this is so great. She said, "If you only go through life doing stuff that's easy, shame on you.
I love that.
Isn't that great?
Yeah.
Like, that is the growth mindset in action.
Absolutely.
Another example, Christopher Reeve.
Oh, wow.
After his accident, doctors were really pessimistic about his chances for recovery. But he embarked on this incredibly rigorous exercise program and defied all expectations.
Just the will to push beyond what anyone thought was possible.
Yeah, simply by believing that he could make progress beyond his current limitations.
Powerful stuff.
It is. Okay, let's bring it back to something maybe a little more relatable for everyday life.
Okay.
How mindset affects your enjoyment of challenges.
Interesting.
Yeah. So there was this study where kids were given puzzles, and initially they all enjoyed it, but then the puzzles got harder. And the kids with the fixed mindset, their enjoyment just plummeted. They even avoided taking the harder puzzles home to practice.
Ah, so it's not just the difficulty itself,
Right.
it's how we perceive that difficulty.
Yeah. They didn't want to risk looking like they weren't naturally good at puzzles.
Right.
But the kids with a growth mindset, they were more drawn to those harder puzzles.
Because they saw it as a challenge.
Yeah, a chance to learn and grow.
Exactly.
And Dweck says that the fixed mindset doesn't really allow for this idea of becoming. There's this pressure to already be accomplished or talented right now.
You have to prove yourself in the moment.
Yeah, exactly. And this fear of not already being good enough really impact how people with a fixed mindset approach things like testing.
Because a test becomes a judgment of your inherent ability,
Exactly.
not just a measure of your current knowledge.
Yeah. There's this feeling that one score can define you forever.
Right, one data point becomes your entire identity.
Yeah. And Dweck shares this story of a 5-year-old named Loretta who moved to the U.S. and was given this one test. And based on that one test, she was placed in a non-elite kindergarten class. And that label, that initial snapshot, just carried so much weight.
Because it created this fixed perception of her abilities.
Yeah. Now, what about the experience of being number one? You might think, oh, that's the ideal, right? But Dweck discusses John McEnroe and his reaction to that status. He loved the preferential treatment. He loved that everyone kind of catered to him. But it reinforced this idea that he was inherently superior and he didn't need to put in the same effort as everyone else.
So, in a way, being number one can actually hinder growth.
Yeah, if it feeds that fixed mindset.
Exactly. Because it removes the need to push yourself.
Yeah.
Become complacent.
Right.
Now, this brings us to something that I find really interesting. This concept of the natural. Like the idea that some people are just born with it.
Right.
Tom Wolfe, in his book, The Right Stuff, talked about those elite military pilots who really believed that they were born with superior abilities.
Yeah, they had that right stuff.
Right. But Chuck Yeager, a true legend in aviation, had a completely different perspective.
What did he think?
Well, he said that proficiency came from hard work and experience. The best pilots fly more than the others. That's why they're the best.
Makes sense.
Yeah. He saw it like Michael Jordan. Constantly pushing your limits is what makes you great. But the fixed mindset creates this pressure to constantly validate those perceived innate traits through immediate success.
So, you have to constantly prove that you're a natural.
Right. You can't stumble. You can't show weakness.
Right. And that can be really, really damaging when you inevitably do encounter failure.
Because failure becomes this indictment of your whole identity.
Yeah.
It's not just that you failed at a particular task, it's that you are a failure.
Yeah. And Dweck tells this really poignant story about a 3-year-old boy named Robert who wasn't accepted into the top preschool in his area.
Oh, wow. At 3 years old.
I know, right?
That seems harsh.
It is. And he went from being considered brilliant to being seen as a failure by some people.
Just based on that one rejection.
Yeah. And, I even remember when I was in 6th grade, I was really good at spelling.
Okay.
And then in 9th grade, I did really well in French.
Yeah.
But I refused to enter any competitions.
Why not?
I was terrified of losing, of no longer being seen as a winner.
So even if you're successful, that fear of failure can still hold you back.
Yeah.
It's a powerful thing.
It is. And, even someone like Ernie Els, who is an incredibly accomplished golfer, has talked about how he struggled with the anxiety of risking failure after achieving so much success.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. It shows that this fear isn't limited to those who haven't achieved anything.
Right. It can affect anyone.
And in the most extreme cases, when this fixed mindset is really tied to external validation, the consequences can be really tragic.
Oh, I hate these stories.
Yeah, me too. But Dweck tells this story about a French chef whose suicide was linked to a demotion in a restaurant rating.
Oh.
That rating, it had become his entire measure of self-worth.
Wow.
It's heartbreaking, but it shows just how damaging that fixed mindset's definition of failure can be.
Absolutely. Your worth shouldn't be tied to a single number.
No. Now, on a lighter note, Dweck shares this anecdote about a fly fishing lesson that she and her husband took at a dude ranch.
Okay.
And even in that casual setting, this competitive dynamic emerged. People were kind of subtly competing, even though it was just supposed to be a fun learning experience.
It's like that mindset of, my success is your failure.
Yeah, and it shows how deeply ingrained the fixed mindset can be. It's almost like we're conditioned to compare ourselves to others.
Right, like it's a zero-sum game.
Yeah. So let's talk about how the growth mindset views talent and effort.
Okay.
So it's not that a growth mindset dismisses talent.
Right.
It's just that it recognizes that even exceptional abilities take a lot of effort to develop.
Like they don't just appear out of thin air.
Right. Effort isn't a sign of weakness. It's what ignites ability.
It's the fuel.
Yeah. And in fact, within a growth mindset, effort is often admired even more than raw talent.
Because it shows commitment, it shows perseverance.
Yeah. And the story of Seabiscuit is such a perfect example of this.
Oh, I love that story.
Me too. It's so inspiring.
It is.
You know, you had this underdog horse, this jockey who'd been injured, a trainer who was down on his luck. And against all odds, through pure determination, through effort, they became champions.
It's proof that anything is possible.
Yeah. But Dweck makes this really crucial point that people with a fixed mindset might intellectually understand the benefits of a growth mindset. They might read self-help books about it, but they often struggle to actually implement those principles.
Because the underlying belief is still there.
Yeah. It's like they're trying to put a growth mindset band-aid on a fixed mindset wound.
I see.
So they might say all the right things, but their actions don't necessarily follow.
So it's not just about talking the talk.
Right. You have to walk the walk. And this leads to a really fascinating question that Dweck explores. If someone with a fixed mindset has already achieved some level of success, why do they feel this constant need to prove themselves? You know, why can't they just relax and enjoy their accomplishments?
Big question.
She uses this analogy of a prince in a fairy tale who slays a dragon.
Okay.
Once he's slayed the dragon, he doesn't have to keep slaying dragons every day to prove his bravery.
Right. His bravery is established.
Right. But for someone with a fixed mindset, every situation feels like a new test.
Like they have to keep earning their stripes.
Exactly. And that constant pressure can be really exhausting. It reminds me of that movie Groundhog Day.
Oh, yeah, with Bill Murray.
Yeah, remember how he's stuck in this time loop?
Right.
And initially, he uses it to repeatedly demonstrate his superiority. It's like a fixed mindset heaven.
He can win over and over again.
Exactly. But he finds it completely empty after a while.
Of course.
And it's only when he shifts to a growth mindset, using his time to learn new skills, help other people, that he actually breaks free from the loop.
So true growth comes from embracing the journey, not just chasing the same outcome.
Exactly.
And it's important to remember that effort isn't the only thing that determines success.
Right.
Life is messy. There are external factors, unexpected challenges, systemic barriers.
Absolutely. And Dweck clarifies that the goal of a growth mindset isn't just about outperforming others. It's about personal development, reaching your own potential.
Right. It's about becoming the best version of yourself.
Exactly. And she uses examples of really high achievers in different fields to show how far a growth mindset can take you.
Right. Because it allows for continuous improvement.
Yeah. Think about Thomas Edison. His relentless curiosity, his commitment to self-education and invention, it was so clearly driven by a growth mindset.
He was a lifelong learner.
Yeah, and he just never stopped pushing the boundaries of what was possible. Now, Dweck also shares this really fascinating study about junior high students transitioning to a more challenging academic environment.
Okay.
Initially, their performance in grade school was really similar. But over 2 years in junior high, the students with a growth mindset actually saw their grades improve.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah.
So they actually thrived in that more challenging environment.
Yet while the students with a fixed mindset, their grades actually declined.
Interesting.
And what's really telling is that the fixed mindset students often attributed their struggles to a lack of ability, or they blamed their teachers.
So they weren't taking ownership of their learning.
Right. But the growth mindset students saw these challenges as opportunities to grow, and they actively sought out new learning strategy.
They were proactive.
Yeah.
That's a key difference.
Yeah. There's another study this time with college students in a challenging chemistry course.
Okay.
And again, the growth mindset students not only earned better grades, but they were also more likely to bounce back from a bad test score.
They didn't let one setback derail them.
Right. Whereas the fixed mindset students who didn't perform well often concluded that they just weren't cut out for chemistry, even if they studied hard.
So the effort alone wasn't enough.
Right. Because their mindset was holding them back.
They weren't approaching the learning process in a way that would help them succeed.
Exactly. Now, I want to touch on this question of whether we're all created equal. Ellen Winter's research on prodigies shows that some children do seem to be born with extraordinary abilities and intense interests.
Right, those kids who just excel in a particular area.
Yeah. But Dweck emphasizes that what really sets these prodigies apart isn't just that initial aptitude, it's their love of learning.
That insatiable curiosity.
Yeah, and their relentless pursuit of their passion, that hunger for challenge. That's the growth mindset in action.
So it's not just about talent, it's about how you cultivate that talent.
Exactly. Think about Mozart or Darwin. Was it just their raw ability, or was it also their relentless dedication, their willingness to put in the hours and the effort?
Right, the years of practice, the failed experiments, all of that goes into it.
And Dweck makes this really important point. We all have interests that can blossom into remarkable abilities if we nurture them with that same growth-oriented approach.
That's such an empowering message.
It is. And I think one of the most powerful examples of this is Marva Collins, who was an extraordinary teacher in a very disadvantaged school in Chicago.
What did she do?
She created this environment where her students, who were often labeled as unteachable, achieved incredible things. 4-year-olds reading high school level vocabulary by Christmas. 2nd graders reciting Shakespeare. It was amazing.
How did she do it?
She believed in her students. She instilled in them this belief that they could learn and grow through hard work. She didn't label them. She guided them through challenges. She'd tell them, there are no shortcuts. I just love children and work harder than a lot of people, and so will you.
That's beautiful.
It is. Now, Dweck contrasts two coaching styles that I think really highlight the difference between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset.
Okay, I'm curious.
On one hand, you have Bob Knight, the basketball coach. Very intense, very intimidating.
Yeah, the general.
Yeah. And his approach really reflected a fixed mindset. It was about, I'm the coach, I know best, and you're here to prove my competence.
So the players were there to serve his ego.
Yeah, pretty much. And while he did win championships, it often came at a cost.
Right. There were stories of player breakdowns and resentment.
Yeah. On the other hand, you have John Wooden, who's also a legendary basketball coach, but he emphasized teaching, learning, and gradual improvement.
He had more of a mentor-for approach.
Yeah, and he really focused on effort and learning from mistakes.
So it was about the team's development, not just winning at all costs.
Exactly. And his players, they felt supported, they learned valuable life lessons, and they thrived.
So it was about more than just basketball.
Yeah. Okay. So Dweck warns us about something she calls the false growth mindset.
What is that?
This is when someone kind of superficially adopts the language of a growth mindset, but they haven't really internalized the core beliefs.
I see.
So they might say things like, oh, it's okay to fail, but deep down, they still believe that failure is a measure of their worth.
So it's about more than just saying the right words.
Right.
You have to actually believe it.
Exactly. So how do we actually cultivate a growth mindset? Dweck outlines a few steps. The first is simply learning about the fixed and growth mindsets. Understanding the concepts can actually be really powerful.
It's like shining a light on those unconscious beliefs.
Yeah. She shares this story of a student who, after learning about these mindsets in class, had this realization that they were constantly trying to prove themselves. They were always worried about looking smart.
Just that awareness can be a game changer.
Yeah. The second step is to start paying attention to your fixed mindset triggers.
Okay.
So when do you find yourself feeling threatened by challenges or by criticism or by the success of other people?
Become aware of those patterns.
Yeah. The third step, this is kind of fun, is to give your fixed mindset persona a name.
A name.
Like a character.
Yeah, it's a way to create some distance from those negative thoughts and to look at them more objectively.
I like that.
Yeah. Dweck uses the example of dumping Dan.
Dumping Dan.
Yeah. That inner critic that tells you you're not good enough, you're gonna fail.
Right. So by giving it a name, you're sort of separating it from your true self.
Exactly.
You can see it more clearly.
Yeah. And the fourth step is to actively educate that persona. So talk back to Dumping Dan or whatever you want to call your fixed mindset persona,
Okay.
and remind yourself that abilities can be developed, mistakes are opportunities for growth, and you're not defined by your setbacks.
So it's about reframing those negative thoughts. Exactly. And Dweck stresses that, this is a process. It's not a one-time event.
Right, takes
You're
time.
going to have moments where you fall back into old patterns,
Sure.
but it's about recognizing those moments and actively choosing a growth mindset.
So be patient with yourself.
Yeah. And when it comes to setting goals, goals that are aligned with growth, it's really important to have a plan and to stick to it.
Right, action is key.
Yeah. Dweck mentions this study with depressed students who had a growth mindset. And even when they were feeling unmotivated, they were more likely to take action.
Because they had a plan.
Yeah. And they knew that even small steps would move them closer to their goal. So living a growth mindset is really about embodying it in your everyday interactions. It's about focusing on the process of learning, celebrating effort, and seeing mistakes as valuable feedback.
Right, it becomes a way of life.
Yeah. And it can be challenging because, the fixed mindset, it offers this really tempting illusion, this idea that you can have inherent worth without putting in the effort.
Ah, that's the trap.
Yeah. But as Dweck makes clear, real growth takes work.
It requires conscious effort and commitment.
Yeah. So some practical strategies for staying on track: set clear goals, develop good habits, and consistently reframe setbacks as opportunities for learning.